Hello and welcome to AROYA Office Hours Live. A couple of reminders before we get started. This hour is your chance to hear from the experts, get answers in real time about data you're seeing within your grow, and share cultivation tips and tricks with other growers in our exciting industry. We thank everyone in advance for not using this time for things like airing policy or industry grievances or asking about AROYA pricing, though you are always welcome to book a demo with us. And hi, my name is Mandy. I'll be your moderator for today's session. Feel free to type any of your questions in the chat throughout this entire session. If your question is selected, we'll have you go ahead and unmute yourself and ask away. Anyone who asks their question live today for the first time will get an AROYA hat. This is limited to US residents only and one hat per household. Plus, we're raffling off one of our limited edition AROYA t-shirts. To enter, everyone on today's live broadcast should post your email address in the chat. Gentlemen, it's great to see you both. Seth and Jason, how are you?
Good.
Yeah, good. How are you, man? How are you today, Mandy?
I'm rocking and rolling. I'm getting excited because I'm about to go on tour for AROYA. I'm going to the East Coast. So yeah, it's my first time. Super psyched.
Should be fun.
How was y'all's week?
Busy.
Yeah.
Yep, doing your thing. Helping growers all over the country, I'm sure.
Yep, trying to get over this real late northwest spring going on. I think it's finally warmed up here, so that's pretty cool.
What is warm like for you guys?
70 plus.
Yeah. Wow.
Up here when it cracks 60, everyone's in shorts and sandals.
Yeah, I love that. Oh man, it's so different from Texas. Anyway, we have a lot of questions that came in through Instagram this week. Are you guys ready to go ahead and dive into some of those?
Sure.
Cool. And just a reminder for anyone on the call today, just go ahead and ask your questions in the chat and we'll go ahead and get to those too. Awesome. So we're just going to go ahead and write down our list. So our friend at Kelp Cutter wants to know, during week 5, my Hugos are drying back overnight from 35% to 20% and are slightly hydrophobic. The EC spikes from 8 to 30 consistently. I'm feeding 3 EC vegetative to 20% runoff. Is this a normal EC reading and how should I adjust moving forward?
So let's kind of just start from the beginning there. To me, it sounds like you're running in just Hugos and you might be running out of substrate volume. My guess is if you're only getting up to 35%, that those blocks have dried back, past that point of no return as far as hydrophobic properties occur into rock wool. Something like a Hugo, we should be seeing 60 to 70% water content and field capacity. And so that's one of the things that you're encountering. One is possibly too small a substrate or those properties of that substrate as far as rock wool saturation have been jeopardized by too low of water content historically. So, and that's what you're seeing. We're topping our graphs off at that 30 decisiemens. A lot of times you'll see it flat top, bounce between 30 and 0. Really what's going on there is it's so dry and or salty that our sensor isn't doing a great job reading it. 30 is probably way higher than we ever should be anyways. And so do keep that in mind. It's probably just a side effect of real low water content in there. The side effects of this as well as far as your steering, going to be a little tricky to stay generative just simply because you don't have enough holding capacity in that substrate to run a short irrigation event and a long dry back. You're going to have to give it a few maintenance shots so that you don't run into 0% or 5% water content in there.
Yeah, I mean, this is a super common problem, especially in rock wool. And part of what really discourages people, because a lot of times that might have happened, less than 2 weeks in. A big thing I run into is a lot of growers when trying to run generative, in early flower, you have to increase your irrigation volume to keep up with the plant growth. So one big dryback event, like let's say the plant grew a lot in the last 2 days, we did not increase that volume. And then suddenly we had one night where the next morning we were down at 20%. Well, at that point, we probably knocked our field capacity down from 65 to maybe somewhere down by 50, even lower, depending on how far that really dried back. And then once you're there, you just don't have the gas tank to steer the vehicle. Essentially, we don't have the holding volume. So depending on how big your plant is, I mean, you could very well be out of substrate size. Could have just had that one unfortunate event early on. I mean, my advice would be if you don't have AROYA or some kind of monitoring system, you need to get that immediately. If you already do, set your targets and alerts to really, help you avoid running into that And then also make sure, when you soak your rock wool initially, that you are in fact achieving that 60 to 70, and even sometimes above 70% water capacity. When you plant into not a fully saturated block, we're kind of locking in that field capacity there. Once the roots start to fill out the block, we're not going to really be able to doctor it back up.
Great. Thank you guys for that. We did get a question that came in through the chats. Brian, do you want to take yourself off mute and ask away?
There we go. In previous episodes, I think I heard you mention that at a feed rate of 3 EC, you wanted to see somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 parts per million of N. If that's not accurate, could you tell me what level of N you would like to see at a feed rate of 3?
I'd have to look back and see if that's totally accurate. I typically would probably be a little higher than 150 ppm at a 3.0 feed. Really the key for dialing that nitrogen content though is to really just get a tissue analysis and see what your plants are doing, and then kind of look at whether you've got higher nitrate levels, in your actual feed. Nitrate's a lot more plant mobile, so that's going to be uptaken a lot easier. One of the big things is being able to back off that nitrate level a little later for certain plants. So it's really a plant by plant basis we're looking at on this one.
So in our case, we have one dosatron manifold and currently have to have a single feed for the whole cultivation facility. So I can't back off per age bracket or for any various phase. We do test our feed and our leachate through waypoint analytical and get an analysis. And we have seen nitrogen in particular, and really at 3 EC feed, we do see almost all of our elements at a higher level in the leachate than we do in the feed. But nitrogen seemed excessive, particularly the ammonium side of our nitrogen, which we were using ammonium phosphate, and we got rid of that because our ammonium levels seemed too high, and we went with potassium phosphate. In order to reduce, but I can't currently reduce my nitrogen at all because I'm using calcium, magnesium, and potassium nitrate, and I need those other components. Do you have a recommendation for a nitrogen source that is not those three?
Honestly, in your situation, I would probably keep rocking what you are and try to look for a different solution genetically.
Okay.
When you have
all of our genetics, of which we have maybe 25 varieties, experience some of the super dark leaves, a bit of that claw effect of the curl at the end. Even with 5.8 pH runoff, 5.8 pH feed, and plenty of our runoff percentages, we try and shoot for around 50% to keep everything just super. I know you don't like the term flushed, but to keep everything at the rate that we're feeding it. Our outputs roughly equal our inputs for the most part, unless a plant gets away from us for a day or two. So I feel like we have high nitrogen levels, but if you don't, our nitrogen levels, for instance, are about 350.
Yeah, that's not super high across the board, but being able to pull it back is nice. And one thing to remember too is like ammonium is much less plant mobile than say calcium nitrate.
Okay.
The plant can actually take up calcium, or the nitrate that's present in calcium nitrate, much easier than it can ammonia.
Okay.
So that can be a driving factor later not later in flower, but later in bulking, when you don't want that nitrogen push and you want to start ripening. As far as pulling, go ahead.
You go.
Okay, I was going to say, as far as pulling back from it goes, sometimes that involves looking at a different nutrient line.
We're mixing salts, and
totally.
It's not a line. It's just, all the base salts.
Oh, okay.
We can change gears. We can change recipe on a dime if we need to. I'm just looking. I haven't done any research yet as to where I might find another nitrogen source that is appropriate. I was recommending the calcium, magnesium, and potassium so that we could get the other elements out of that. But I thought, and maybe I just misheard, that I don't know if it was just episode 25 last week or the week prior or something, but I listened to all 25 of them in a 3 or 4 week span here. So
cool. Well, thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Together for me. But you mentioned high nitrogen acting as a plant auxin and causing cell elongation. What level is nitrogen so high that happens?
That would be a really difficult. I'd have to like actually do some research to establish that, honestly, with every strain. But hitting 350, one thing you can definitely consider is backing off the calcium nitrate a little bit.
Okay.
In general, and maybe supplementing with calcium silicate to keep your calcium up. But some of it might be when we've got a plant that's like, it's not just nitrogen at that point. You might even be able to back off, your root zone EC, your feed EC a little bit.
So as a general matter, I am having some trouble getting an inverse relationship between EC and water content at any point. We just recently have sort of gotten it on the longer dry back at the end of the irrigation cycle. As the day goes on, we do get a bit of an inverse relationship eventually. But typically, as my water content goes up, my EC chases it. It's right underneath of a parallel. And so if as I dry back, initially I get a lowering EC, and I'm not hitting, in many cases, I mean, it's strain dependent, but I'm not hitting my feed rate of 3. So I'm down in some cases 1.5, and as high with others as we dry back and get an EC of 6 or 7 or 8. But what does that mean? I guess the relationship, if my EC, my substrate EC is below my feed EC.
Yeah, so we're looking at some of those lower ranges like that. If you're not stacked up enough going into flower and stretch kicks in when that plant's going to really start taking up those nutrients, that plant's eating them faster than we can put them in. And that's why I say, like, across the board, general rule of thumb is on the bottom end of your range, try to hit a 4.0 before you flip. Okay. And for some plants, that's not even enough. But that's generally when it's mirroring that line, that's what you're seeing. More water comes in and we actually get more salt throughout that dryback. The plant just chomping right through it.
So we're nowhere near for it. Our veg runoffs are so high that it's just the same as the feed rate constantly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's where the challenge is in veg, really, like, getting away from hand watering and going to a micro drip system.
And that is what we use. I guess I mean to say we have a large substrate as well for veg. I think we're in a number 2 nursery pot, which we filled up with actual water and it's 1.5 gallons. And then, after the substrate settles from compaction a little bit, which is a perlite cocoa mix that we're using, it really is about 1.3 gallons of actual volume. And not until we only veg for 2 weeks, and we get 16, 17, 18-inch tall plants, depending on the variety. And by then they're rooted throughout. So perhaps we could, start reducing our irrigation window in veg to achieve a bigger dryback and a higher EC. Is that, I can't change the feed rate. So
yeah, and you might also just decrease the amount of runoff that you're getting. When you do that, make sure that you're monitoring your runoff pH so that you can ensure you are still keeping a balanced nutrient composition in that substrate. But if you drop the amount of runoff, it'll also let that EC stack a little quicker.
Yeah. Yeah. That's where we probably need to be. We're just pushing it all through, for sure. Okay. I think that largely answers that question, but you don't think 350N is dangerously high?
No.
In the general matter.
I don't think that's outside of a lot of the things we've seen. That's, in fact, I mean, you're mixing it per the instructions you've got. So.
Okay. Well, that's the thing. The instructions I got are from a few different sources.
Oh, if you have the ability, just backing off on the nitrate is going to be a good place to start on that.
What I actually did is you all use Apogee instruments in your light sensors, I understand, right? So this formula I got through a colleague from Bruce Bugby out of Utah, and really and so maybe the next follow-up question was, Bruce and my consultant, Dr. Royal Hines, had very similar levels of N and everything else, really. They only varied by about 15% from each other in their estimates on what we should feed cannabis. But they come in around 700 parts per million when you kind of ask them what they would feed. Is that because your or AROYA's sort of crop steering irrigation strategies differ in their strategy, that you need a higher feed EC, or do you just truly believe that we need triple or quadruple what these gentlemen have kind of told me, because I'm using their ratios, but I've brought it up to 3 EC, if that makes sense.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
They had to get 150 in, and I brought everything. I just tripled everything until I got to 3 EC.
Yeah, we've definitely seen that we can push these plants with a lot higher EC, especially if we've got sufficient light intensity and we're supplementing with CO2. Up in that 3 range is very reasonable. Sometimes if we're running LEDs, or depending on the nutrient brand, we'll go even higher than that. So it comes down to how fast we want to bulk our biomass and the amount of steering that we're using when analyzing those substrate sensors.
Sure.
Yep. And then honestly, identifying certain strains, like it sounds like a lot of your plants uptake nitrogen very easily.
They seem to have, according to the classic symptoms, they seem to have a lot.
Exactly.
I've only done a tissue analysis once, and that was on unhealthy plants, to be honest. So
right.
I don't have a lot of tissue analysis data.
Mm-hmm.
Great questions, Brian. Thanks for piping up.
Sure.
Challenging us.
Thanks for bringing the really good crop steering questions, and thanks for being a fan and continuing to watch the show. If you have any other questions, please let us know. But we do have some more that came in through the chats. Joel, did you want to take yourself off mute and ask so you can give a little bit more context? Or I can totally ask for you, Joel. Okay, so Joel wants to know, I'm using Athena newts and growing in a 2-gallon cocoa bags, and have a question about adding something else to help increase terp profile. Being labor involved is not a factor. I hear people adding some sort of organic input to help with that, but wanted to get your thoughts.
We love 2-gallon bags. Athena newts is pretty stable on the market these days. Adding organics, I would try to avoid most any organics. If you have a drip irrigation system, obviously you can go in and do some hand feed of organics, and keep in mind that in Rockwool, there's not a lot of material for those organics to feed and develop off of. So sometimes it's a little bit of a wasted energy. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, the same goes with cocoa. Honestly, you're buying a sterilized media for a reason. And part of the problem, I mean, there's 2 problems here, I guess. Like, if we're going to go with organics indoors, we're introducing, depending on what it is, the possibility of adding pests to the equation that we didn't have to. That's a big one. And then the other thing we've got to look at with organic inputs is like, what are you putting in there? If you're putting in some sort of live tea, that's a culture that has everything it needs in there to break down those nutrients, cool. But if you're just going to go ahead and put, a compost slurry and some guano and some other just raw organic inputs, we've got to have the microbiome in that soil to digest that and make it plant available. And, that's kind of why you see like, the whole KNF and JDAM movement with indigenous microorganisms is the term, but basically they're taking a more developed, complete soil in that biome and trying to reproduce that. So when we move that whole operation indoors, the breakover point of, how much effort I'm putting in versus how much I'm getting out really looks bad for us. Like, I don't generally promote organics indoors. Outdoors, have a good time and just follow the rules. Like Jason said, don't put it through your drip system, because you're going to be buying a new drip system pretty soon if you plug it up. And even IPM, the same thing goes. Like, anything that you see that's a wettable powder, nematodes, whatever, just remember your drip system was not designed to handle chunks of anything. So hand applications are the best for anything other than your nutrient solution.
Yeah, just always a good reminder, keep your filters clean. Have a few filters, one after each pump, and after each of your injection mixing stations, have one at the solenoid for the benches. Keep those things clean. Check them on the daily basis, clean them out every other day if you need to.
Great. Joel, did that answer your question? And I see that you did add another question here, but I'm going to go ahead and move on down to Omid's. Omid, do you want to take yourself off mute and go ahead and ask our hosts? Or I can definitely ask for you. Okay, so Omid wants to know, I'm curious where, if any, the boundary between vegetative and generative cues occurs. To be more specific, is there a set parameter for number of shots that would dictate veg versus gen? Is the number
sorry
of shots...
about that.
Oh yeah, no worries. Yeah, you want to just hop right in?
Yeah, so essentially my question is, we're pretty new to crop steering at our facility here. And we're learning about how different types of feeding can cue generative or vegetative growth. I guess my question is there some sort of set parameters for where's the boundary between what dictates what's generative and what's vegetative? Like if I'm going for longer drybacks with bigger shots to cue generative growth in the plant, why wouldn't I just do like what we used to do for the last 10 years? You water once when the lights turn on, you water again halfway through the day. You have a long dryback in between. Is that not generative cues to the plant?
So it's a spectrum, right? On one of the end of the spectrum, we could go as generative as possible, and we wouldn't see the best plant growth that we could have. On the other end of the spectrum, completely vegetative. We'd have real tall, maybe lanky plants. And so also keep in mind that irrigation alone isn't the only thing that's cueing the plant for a vegetative or degenerative morphology. So when we think about it, when we talk about vegetative and generative, we're just looking for a desired plant response. And we're trying to pair that with the genetics that we're running as well. And I've talked about this. Some plants are already very generative leaning. And in that case, we'll run longer sets of vegetative and maybe just use a short generative cue to establish reproductive parts on that plant. And so kind of keeping that stuff in mind, it is a spectrum. And when you ask about number of shots versus dryback between the shots, usually we'll talk about number of shots. And so for, my basis of P1s, so trying to do just generative, I like 4 shots in the course of 1 hour. I mean, that's kind of just the general baseline that I go with. We could do 6 shots, but I would try probably not less than 4, unless you have extremely slow drip rates, which, yeah, that's my basis for P1.
Yeah, and a big part of that, where that comes in with the multiple shots, is limitations of the media we're working in. So if we wanted to go as generative as possible, like you were saying in the old days, say 5-10 gallon pot, got a 10 gallon, I'm going to water it once in the morning, and I might not even water it tomorrow. Right. I might let it really dry back. That's going as generative as we possibly can. However, like Jason said, 4 in an hour, that 15 minutes gives us time for the water to move around in the media. So like rock wool, for instance, if you've grown on that, you're familiar with the idea that if I put a shot that's too big, and that 10% is 10 to 15% is probably too big, we're going to get some channeling and runoff. It's not going to saturate the block in the way we want to.
Right.
So yeah, it is all on a spectrum. And then when we talk about genetics, our classic indicas that are short, that's a generative leaning plant. It's already growing like that. The ones that we probably really want to hit, on the other end, something like a classic diesel strain, some of the OGs. GMO has been a huge one lately that people seem to be struggling with the crop steering. GMO, I'll almost never stack it. I'll go generative till week 5, 6, maybe stack it or maybe bulk it up for a week. But that's how that plant likes to grow. If I give it too many shots in a day, period, ever, it's going to start stretching. It's going to throw white pistils. We're going to be back to not finishing the plant the way we want to.
Right.
And the end application is some of those strains, don't necessarily work in certain cultivation models for profit.
Right.
So we're in a stasis now where it's like we've got our crop steering techniques. And now we're getting genetics to catch up, just like any other crop where we've got strains and even certain, I'd say substrains almost, varieties and cultivars that work better in certain areas and better in certain conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where we emphasize using harvest groups, documenting plant heights, get as much crop registration, pictures, notes into each of those harvest groups as you can, because you're establishing, the processes in which this plant is growing. And if you make some changes in those processes, we want to be able to compare it to the last run on whether the effects of that modification to our template is an improvement or if there's no effect, or if it's got a negative impact on our end result.
Constantly want P1s and 15-minute shots or B1s. You get to later weeks and week 4 and stuff, change your P1 to more of a P2 shot to make it more generative instead of vegetative.
You want to ask?
Like halfway through.
Sure.
That'd be my only question about it.
Yeah. Here, my head grower here has a question also, kind of following up with that.
Ron, let's hear it.
Yeah.
If I wanted to, let's say we do the P1, 15 minutes, 15-minute time difference between each shot. Is that something that I should do the whole way through, or should during week 3, 4, or sometime after the stretch, go back into full generative and not do the 15-minute, more like 30-minute shots or something? 30 minutes in between each shot, sorry.
So I was just given that as a basis of a generative P1 irrigation. And so you'll need to, document how long it takes for that specific cultivar to stretch and stop stretching. And typically we use that as the indicator of when to switch from our generative stacking to a vegetative bulking type of irrigation system.
Really awesome. As soon as the
Parameters.
stretch stops.
And one thing to look at it, whether we're in generative or vegetative steering, P1 is to help us achieve, peak saturation, field capacity. So again, if we're like in some styles, people would want to stretch it out to, let's say, a 5 or 6% shot every half hour or 45 minutes. The main reason that is because if we tried to put those on every 5 or 10 minutes, we would get runoff before we actually hit field capacity.
Right.
So we want to, no matter what, reach field capacity with a certain number of shots. Now, some plants, we can up that number of shots trying to get it up there and bulking if we want. If they're going to respond to more and more shots in the day, we can use that time to add more shots. But even in bulking, we want to get that P1 done over quickly so we can get our initial dry back and keep hitting it with our small 1% bumps throughout the day.
This is the nice thing about modern automated irrigation systems is that we can set those frequencies and volumes pretty easily from the irrigation systems. And what Seth's talking about, and the reason that we would space them, even if we are going as generative as possible, space them out a little bit, is the capillary effect in that substrate. And my favorite way to visualize is if I have a completely dry kitchen sponge and I put it under the sink and I've got the sink, moderate or high turned up. It's going to start draining through the bottom of that kitchen sponge before the edges of the kitchen sponge even become wetted out. Now, if that sink is just dripping onto the kitchen sponge, then we'll see that entire sponge soak up before it starts dripping out at the bottom.
Yeah, that's a great way to visualize it. I like that.
Oh, you're on mute.
Okay, cool. I think you answered a lot of our questions. I appreciate that.
Great. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Thanks for asking that. Yeah, we're just going to keep on going down our list because we have so many questions this week. Joel, did you want to take yourself off mute? Your question is up next. Or I can definitely ask for you. All right, Joel wants to know, we're on drippers and we're going to hand feed in something. Is there something that you could add to help increase that?
Not sure. We might need a little clarification on. Is there something you can add to help increase that? Help increase the hand feeding? What are we trying to increase?
Yeah, are we not getting enough flow through the drippers to keep up? So you're hand feeding.
Yeah, Joel, if you want to add some more context to that question, we can. But we can go back to that one. Oh, increasing terp profile. Yeah.
Gotcha. So, I mean, no matter what strain we're talking about, we have genetic potential and environmental potential. So what we're looking at is making our environment as best as we can for the plant. When we're talking about specifically upping terps, one thing to look at might be eventually getting a tissue analysis, seeing what we might be lacking. The other thing to look at too is like cannabis, especially with breeding, like we've got all these different traits going different ways. Some plants, if we grow them in a drier environment, are going to do better for quality, some not so much. So really it's about fine tuning your environment and then making sure you've got a complete nutrient profile. There is no like magical, I put this chemical on and I get more terps. Another thing that I think people, especially in a commercial setting, struggle with is, hey, we're planting all of this on an 8 or 9 week rotation, maybe 10. Some strains just aren't done at 8 or 9 weeks. A big important part of it is getting your loop out. Look at those trichomes, make sure they're smoky colored, amber colored. And remember that all your terpenes and cannabinoids have a biosynthetic pathway. So one molecule is created, it's modified. There's steps to creating everything. If we pull something too early, I mean, that's just a good example of that would be seeing, If you go get tested and you've got a really high THCA content, but not a very high THC content, that's a good sign. You didn't pull it early. And you'll see a correlation between high THCA and a lot of plants that have some lower terps compared to the same plant. Like if we left 3 branches on it and let it go another 2 weeks.
And some of our clients use USB microscopes. A great way to grab a snapshot of what your trichomes are looking like on a specific day. So as you are getting closer to what you suspect is the ideal harvest day, take a snapshot of that strain and log it to your harvest group. Go back next time, and you should have a pretty good projection on the perfect time to pull that strain down. Granted, no other variables have been modified throughout that cycle.
Right. And, there's still a little bit of that classic knowledge with, pulling them later makes the strain feel heavier. Part of that holds true just because of that degradation and biosynthetic pathway over time. That being said, I've personally found if I can let stuff grow a little longer, I will get a better terp expression out of it, especially if it's something that I have been struggling with that with. On the other side, pop a pack of 10 seeds that are all the same F1 cross, and you'll find a range of different terpene expressions in there. So that's also hugely genetically controlled. Like I can pull a bag seed off of some really, really good bud, and depending on what else happened, it might not be that great. The same way, if you pulled the seed out of an apple and plant it, you're not going to get a red delicious back.
Great. Joel, did that answer your question? He says, thanks. I'm so thankful and grateful for all you do. Aw, that's really nice. Awesome. We're getting a lot of questions, and so we're just going to keep going. Brian, did you want to go ahead and ask yours?
Sure, it's super basic. I might have missed it in all the episodes, but do you have a preferred feed rate, and is it different for different substrates?
So my favorite are the 0.3 gallon per minute. I think from Netafim they're actually a 0.29, but we'll call it a 0.3 just because it's when we say gallons, a lot of those are actually liters per hour. And I think, let's see, is that gallons per minute for the
gallons per hour?
Gallons per
for
hour.
0.3 or 0.5.
Yeah,
0.3 and 0.5 are great. If you're up in your media size to 2 gallons, you might want to go for a 0.5 or even a 1.0 with a splitter. But part of it depends on how many zones you've got to rotate through and how quickly you need to be putting this water on. When you've got a big facility, let's say you've got 14 zones in a room and a controller and pump that can only run one zone at a time. All right, well, we've got some logistics to figure out there and how quickly we need to get through those so we could say, actually execute a bulking feed. But if we have total control and without that limitation, I agree with Jason. I personally like the 0.3s. The smaller feed you have, the more control you have, the less likely you are to cause, channeling, excessive runoff, any of those issues.
Do you have any tips or tricks to help detect whether or not you are channeling versus properly saturating and pushing through?
Teros 12 in the substrate?
Yeah. Well, here's a good one. On your graph, if you're seeing, well, there's 2 things. One, watch your graph. You can look and see when you've applied each feed. Go watch those plants at that feed. If you're supposed to have 4 feeds in your P1 and you're getting runoff at your 3rd feed, but then you put more on and that continues to go up, that means your volumetric water content goes up after that. That means you're just putting it on too fast and it's beating off, basically.
I feel you. Yep. We do have a Teros 12 in the substrate. I was wondering if anything on the graph might, or between the leachate EC and the substrate EC, if maybe that would be telling.
Yep. And you can sometimes see your EC drop off a little bit at kind of a weird time, like partially through your P1. Go down a little bit and you're like, why does it go down an extra time there? Like I shouldn't have runoff, right?
Okay.
Yeah, and Brian, a good practice that sometimes clients don't catch up with is take your runoff readings from the same exact substrates that you have your Teros 12s in. So if you've got 5 Teros 12s in the zone and you're taking 5 different runoff readings to get a good average of that plant population, try and make that the same one, and then you can correlate those runoff readings a little bit more exactly to the chart you're seeing.
And that's what we have. Our catch pan is under that plant.
Perfect.
Sure. Thanks, guys.
Brian, thanks for that question. We do have a little bit of a question from Terp Turtle Farms. He does want to ask, it's not a direct question, he says, but a small discussion about generative stress. If we run out of questions, we have a lot of Instagram questions, but Turtle Farms, do you want to go ahead and take yourself off mute and kind of ask about what you were thinking?
Hey, how's it going?
Hey,
Hey, yeah, I don't know if you remember before, I was running in the Hugos and I ran out of root space like everyone does. And so this time I'm running in the slabs for the first time. We're on day 4 of flower. Room's dialed, everything's dialed. Meters are reading up to about 64 at the end of my P1s. There's 0 P2s yet, getting down to 43 every night. So I'm seeing a nice 20% dry back consistently, you know, creeping up a little every day. I'm seeing for the first time, you know, when you say generative stress, do I want to see a little bit of stress in my plants? Because for the first time, I'm used to seeing plants that stay perfectly green, beautiful all the time. I'm really seeing what appears to be the most minor of magnesium issues, like, you know, a little bit of lightning between but it's everything else in the plant looks so good. So when I'm running that generative stress, do I want to see a little stress?
ideally, no. The stress you want to see is that shortened internode. So
I see that too, but I'm
yeah.
seeing that, you know, that little bit. So then I'm thinking a little bit too heavy on the dry back. I want to, you know, go a little less.
I would look at your root zone EC first, and then make sure you're not.
It's stacked to 5.
It's stacked to 5. Okay.
It's stacked to 5 at full saturation, and it dries back to about 8, 8.5.
Okay, that's not super high.
Yeah, no,
just so you know,
pretty good.
Yep, but I mean, it's not so low that I would say for sure you have a deficiency, but most of that would point towards a nutrient deficiency.
Yes, you think maybe increase EC a little bit, huh?
Possibly increase the EC. You know, before I like to play around too much with that, I really always say go back to the tissue analysis and figure out what exactly I'm looking at.
Yeah, I don't have access to that.
Okay. So maybe up your EC a little bit. Look at what you're feeding. You know,
with everything else dialed, I mean, I'm 22 to 25% runoff, 3.0 Athena, like everything looks great. It's just for the first time I'm seeing that a little bit of yellowing, just light between, and mostly on the bigger fans, but no red stems, no red petioles, just perfect looking plants. But I'm seeing this light color that makes me nervous. I've never seen before.
Yeah, keep an eye on your pH or runoff. I mean, that's the easiest way to catch a nutrient imbalance. You know,
5.9 seems right. That's why I called in. I was like, man, everything seems pretty dialed in. The room stays within 0.2 VPD where I set it. Like, and so I thought maybe, I'm just drying back a little too hard, but 20% shouldn't be too hard, right?
No, and as long as you're staying above, you know, if you call 40 your bottom end so that you don't dip into that dangerous zone, then you're solid. Yeah. I think to me, it sounds like is it all the plants in the room too, or is it just a handful that have this?
Okay. So that's the other thing that's interesting is it's 3 zones all in rock wool and on the slabs. And then I have 1 R&D tray with some strains that I made myself in the corner. It's just a little 3x3 and 1 gallon cocos that I hand water, and they look pristine. They're not showing the same thing. But I don't have meters in those, so I don't know what the dry back is on those.
Yeah, and they're also a different strain, so it's tough to it's not an apples to apples for a few different reasons.
It's so hard to tell.
Yeah, that's where it's tough. I wouldn't try to do anything too drastic, honestly. Maybe up your VDC a tiny bit, but maybe just look at modulating your runoff a little bit and really make sure you're always coming in, you know, if you're feeding at a 6.0, 5.8, 5.9 runoff. If your runoff pH starts to go above your feed pH, then we're looking at a pretty bad nutrient balance. The plant isn't taking up the salts that we want it to.
Yeah. I mean, I feed it like 5.65 and I'm seeing like 5.9 in the runoff. So it's pretty close. It's been going down. It was up higher. And I mean, going down would tell you I'm slightly more acidic, meaning maybe the EC was too high, right? Which is a little.
When your runoff comes out more acidic than your feed, what we're seeing is the plant pulling out those cations or negatively charged ions. So lower pH, more positive charge in the solution. And the positive ions aren't really what we want the plant uptaking. So one thing to look at too is if your pH is coming out a little higher, trying to push a little more runoff and get rid of some of those, but not pushing so much that you bottom out your EC and shock the plant. Because that's part of why we also always want to keep going with, you know, that 10 to 15% runoff. of our last shot, just because we have to use runoff to maintain that balance a little bit. No matter what plant we have, we can't force every part of our feed EC into it.
Yeah.
The plant's
So
only going to take up what it needs to.
that's what I mean. I'm getting like 22 to 25% runoff, but it's 10 feeds. It's every 15 minutes over like the lights on plus 2 hours, and then it's about 2 hours and 15 minutes. So it is heavy. I'm almost certain that I'm getting more, like I'm getting a little runoff earlier than I want to. But at the 22, or to 25, I'm happy with that. So I've just been letting it, go. And I'm sure over the next 5 days, it's just going to grow into that, but I don't know. I don't know.
And the other thing to remember too, dude, is even if you correct that, those leaves that are yellow will stay yellow. Yeah, that's the thing. Like and it sucks if you have a deficiency early on, because a lot of times the plant's going to outgrow it just fine, especially if you're treating it well. It's just going to, you walk by at week 6 and you're like,
I mean, it's so minor, but I'm so OCD that I see it. I'm like, what's going on here? Because I don't see that, So I'm like, what is happening? So that was my only seeing the cocoa ones in the corner look so great. And I'm like, again, different strains, but then seeing them all in the slabs, my first time in the slabs, I'm thinking, well, all I could think is that the 20% was a little too hard on the dry back. But yeah, it was weird to see that slight mag deficiency. And then also I feed the 3.0 Athena, but my water has a base of like 0.29 EC. I don't run RO. And so I feed 3.0 based as my 0.3 as my 0. So it's really 2.7. So you don't think I could just be having a little bit low on the mag and calcium from being that 0.3 lower on the EC, right?
Have you run a water sample analysis on what you're coming in with?
I just looked up online the local, the water registry, and it's basically all calcium that's in there, whatever random chemicals. So but again, that's kind of beyond my.
Yeah, sometimes when you get into water quality issues too, you can have basically neutralizing effects with stuff that's already in the water. Then we mix different ions in, and they actually get bound up and fall out of solution, even though you don't see like a huge accumulation. A good example from outside ag would be Roundup. That's something we're all familiar with. If you've got really basic water with like a high carbonate content and you dump Roundup in there, it's only going to be maybe half as effective as it would be in clean water. And then we've got to correct that chemically. And that's just because it's bound. And big reason for that, your water has a lot of iron in it. Glyphosate binds to iron in the soil, and that's why, it doesn't kill everything on the earth when you spray it.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And we can run into the same kind of binding issues with plant salts as well.
So, I mean, then overall, what do you think? I would just ride it out, see if it corrects. Also, I'm only at 700 ppfd early in flower, when normally I'm up more around 8 or 9. So they're not getting as much light as they normally would at this time. I don't know if
I'd ramp that up and ride it out, dude, and then just expect to stare at those leaves and be a little angry with yourself for this run. That's the worst part, right? Is like,
the good thing is it's only day 4, so they're going to be plucked in like 15 days anyway, so we won't have to look at them anymore.
Yep, exactly. And honestly, like that's the hardest part with cannabis growing, is going over from like, especially if you've grown either personally or as a hobby or whatever, back in the day, especially with the small setup, you're used to like caring so much about each individual plants. And now, if you're scaling up, it's switching your mindset over to the EIT mindset, economic injury threshold. Yes. Anything I do has to have a breakover point. If I do nothing, but it costs me more to, like, I'll use fungus gnats as a great example. If you're introducing organics, like we talked about before, and then you're spending a bunch of money on, let's say, Natural or 22WP or anything you want to throw at it, you're kind of just chasing your tail on something that only bothers you.
Yeah,
that plant doesn't care about those flies flying around. It's not.
I almost don't even count it as pests.
No, well, they don't. They eat the fungus that grows around the roots in soil. If we're doing everything right and our soil is set up, we don't have much food for them in there.
Yeah, another thing, agreeing with Seth on, ride it out up the light schedule, or up the light intensity a little bit. You've already changed the size of your substrate, so you've changed your irrigation volumes. I tried not to change any more variables in there for this run, so that that, hey, when we've upped this substrate size and nothing else has changed, this is the difference in outcome. so that you're not doing a multivariable analysis trying to understand, hey, are these leaves yellow because I didn't give them enough light, or is it because of some other aspect
Yeah, the
involved
light-
with the larger substrate?
Well, I got behind. I got behind a little there, so they just
Mhm.
over the next couple days we'll catch them up. But yeah, normally they'd be at 900 by now, and yeah, it was a couple hundred behind.
Mhm.
But yeah, all right. Well, we'll just ride it out. We'll see what happens. I'll let you know in a few weeks.
Sounds good, dude.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thanks for that question. We're just going to keep moving right along. Brian, do you want to go ahead and ask yours?
Me again. So same feed rate, 3.0 EC, 5.8 pH. But my mothers, and just recently, have begun to exhibit a higher leachate than the feed. Feed again, 5.8. Leachate's coming out with really high runoff volume, like 60, 70, 80%. We're seeing 6.3, 6.4 from that 5.8 input. And at a more modest runoff of even 50%, we were seeing 7.7 pH in the leachate. I did hack the mother plants back. They were just getting quite large, and we took some clones and brought them way back down, like probably a 90% reduction in green matter. And they're 3-gallon fabric pots with cocoa, 10% perlite. What are your thoughts?
Well, right off the bat, what I see is you took out that plant's ability to transpire, period,
Yeah.
when you did that. So to be honest, it probably didn't need water for like a week.
Sure.
Maybe that's using a little bit of hyperbole there, but I've noticed that every time, especially, on moms or any kind of big pruning, you're losing so much transpirational capacity. And then, the tendency is like, well, we gotta give it some to get it growing. Right.
Sure.
Maybe you need to give it like just a tiny, tiny bump of water and let it dry back for quite a while, because if you keep watering it too much, all you're going to do is like overwater a plant that can't take it and drown it. You said you're in 5-gallon, right?
No,
Three.
And I should clarify, I have two different sizes of
Okay.
mother plants. The one exhibiting the worst problem is much larger, and I actually didn't cut clones off of it. I reduced it by probably, what do you say, 50%? 50% in size. It's still an enormous plant, I think, for the size. It's maybe a 4-foot by 4-foot canopy, about 6-8 inches deep, right? It's just like a menorah. It's very wide.
Nice.
As because I was just going for like a field of cuts to come off of this thing, and we're gonna, right. Well, we were supposed to clone off of it today, but we had to go with a younger plant because it just doesn't look right. We don't want our clones to be poor. And so that one actually exhibits the worst problem. So I cut it down by about 50%. So I still reduced its transpirational capacity, like you mentioned. But the smaller plants that let's say they were 2 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet, I reduced them to 2 feet by 2 feet by one node, right?
Yeah. All they have left is one node to grow back up.
And those had a higher leachate as well, maybe 6.3, 6.4, 6.5. So like unbearably higher, like totally, completely out of this world, like 7.7 was. So the bigger plants are we're coming out naturally at 7.7 and a very low EC, 1.7 EC. And again, really chasing when it feeds, the EC rises drastically with that feed, but still never, even with all that runoff and all that, what I assume is pushing through, never achieves the feed EC in the substrate. It never gets very close even.
Gotcha. I mean, yeah, when you cut it back that big, basically the plant shuts down for a few days. So you end up with nutrient accumulation. And then also when you do those big cutbacks, it's not going to take up nutrients the same way it has been. So right away, selectively, we've stalled the plant out. It stops growing. Well, immediately it's going to stop uptaking most things, including water, at a very slow rate for the time being. And then as it's building up, we're going through that whole cycle of building new tissue again. So we're basically starting with a framework, and then now it's back to just like we were vegging again. Okay, well, it starts out, the plant's eating a little bit, more mass, more feeding. How long have you been keeping your moms though? That's like where I'd lead with that.
Sure. That's actually a great question for how long these ones were alive. What would you think?
Maybe 6 months longest.
Maybe 6 months?
Yeah, that's really pushing it.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. That's like, if I was in like a 10-gallon pot, I'd be like, well, you should go grab the trunk and wiggle it and see if it starts to break off of the roots.
Okay, sure. So actually a follow-up question. What our new sort of protocol for our mother and stock plants is such that we don't have tissue culture capacity here or anything like that. So if we want to maintain a lot of genetics, but we want larger harvest group sizes with singular cultivars per harvest group, we're only going to do 2 cultivars per week. We harvest weekly. We're in a perpetual streak of harvest here. So if I have 25 varieties, that's 12 weeks until I need that variety again. And so what we now decided to do is we cut our production clones. We also use some of those clones for preserving the genetic, right? It goes through the rooting phase. It comes out of rooting. It goes onto the mother table into a smaller pot, and it grows its way big again. But that would still be a 12-week process, roughly 10 of which would be a rooted plant growing at 500 ppft. So do you have any recommendations for genetic preservation when you have a long cycle time between the use of those genetics?
I mean, the easiest way is to put it in long-term tissue culture and store that mother, obviously, but you have to bat said we don't have that. One good thing to do is just time it. You're pulling those clones off. You're growing that first round of mothers. 12 weeks is enough to preserve that, take some cuts, and then grow a mom crop if you have the room. So saying a plant that's, a month and a half old, but we got 10 of them to achieve what we want to off of this one. And then we just throw those away after that first clone harvest. We've kept 1 to take cuts off to keep the cycle going, but basically rotating it out and not, because that's a challenge, right? Your turnaround time for the next time you're going to grow that strain is about as long as I tell you should be keeping a mom.
Sure.
So I think you're looking more realistically at fresher mom, calling your mom a crop and your harvest as clones and running it in a much shorter turnover time.
Do you have any concerns with any type of genetic drift? You always hear about, historically people said, oh man, if you cut off a cut, you're going to drift away from that initial original genetic potential.
100%.
But
The longer you keep a plant alive, the more you're inviting somatic mutations.
Do you believe that the stress of the cutting, for instance, in my cycle, I have 12 weeks, like we said, from the day I would cut a clone until that clone needs to be a productive mom again to cut clones off of. Are you suggesting that I maybe bring it halfway through that, cut another clone, throw that original plant away and start that over, so it's like a prime 6-week-old mother plant and just keep that cycle going?
Exactly. When we're talking about genetic drift, really what it is an accumulation of mutations that can't be repaired through meiosis. So cannabis is an annual plant. It's evolved to basically separate out all of its DNA, repair it, go to seed every year. Every year we don't let that plant go to seed. We're accumulating mutations. There are, using tissue culture techniques like embryogenesis that can help that out. But that's just it's a factor. It's what goes along with cloning a plant over and over. And again, to put it to bigger agriculture, we see the same thing in cherries, apples, any of the other many plants that are propagated through cuttings. So it's there, it's real. If you're growing a strain that's been, 20, 30 generations into moms, that we expect to see some mutations for sure. But the thing to remember too, with like those somatic mutations, is that might be one branch in the room. I've grown some stuff where we were way more generations than I ever knew into that cut. It was kind of one of we had a few where you're talking to someone on the phone, they're like, oh, that name, pretty sure that was this that someone else was giving me, 10 years before that. And those ones you see some kind of, you might get a branch that looks like it's a polyploid. We might get one that's got pink hairs on it, one that's half albino. But what's happening there is we have all these mutations that are building up, easier to mutate, but they're not necessarily transferred to the whole plant, if that makes sense.
I worked at a facility for some time that we were getting basically like pistil-less female flowers. Just the calyxes were just kind of bulbous and soft, very, very soft. And it would test at like 4% THC on that branch. And the rest of it would be relatively normal.
Yep. That's an example where you had that one axial meristem that had mutated and then it just took off.
Yeah.
And you'll see the same thing again: apples, cherries, pears, peaches, name it. If you start going through an orchard, you'll find some branches that put off, even though they're the same tree, one odd colored fruit. One branch puts off some huge ones. One puts off ones that taste terrible. But it's definitely just a side effect, and something that going forward, now that cannabis is legal, we can actually deal with that the same way that's been dealt with in other plants, which is breeding, tissue culture. And then also, going forward, now that everyone actually has access to things, we don't have to be so married to a particular cultivar.
And if I could, Terp Turtle there was saying he didn't have access to testing. Can I name drop a company? That's not like I get paid for it or anything, but
sure.
Yeah, Terp Turtle, if you're listening, I use Waypoint Analytical. They're kind of all over the country. They got in a bunch of different states. It's $55 to test your feed solution and or your leachate or whatever liquid you want. We do that every other week. So if you want to, once in a while, you could get access to that even without a special license or anything. And I don't see any other questions. So if it's okay, I'd like to actually ask a follow-up question to my initial question earlier about high N. You said I'm not in a danger zone for N, and that's great, except for that now I still don't know the cause of some of my problems. In late flower, not on all varieties, but routinely I get flowers that are ripening. They appear to be the hairs are turning orange and becoming less turgid. And then I get the foxtails with white pistils. If I'm not sure what the cause is, then I thought we were onto something with the high end because I thought maybe that was what was going on. But
it could definitely be. That could definitely be part of the problem. With a lot of strains, like I say, after week 4, end of stretch, essentially, I like to start pulling that nitrate back. Another factor is, and I hate to keep bringing up genetics, but they're a mess in the cannabis world right now.
Sure.
Find me a cut that's got an actual proven lineage. And if I had money, I'd give it to you, but there's not many out there with like verifiable tracked lineages. Like obviously there's great breeders out there. Many people that have been curating lineages that like love talking to them. They've got great things to say. They've kept great track of that in, let's say, the 30 years since it came into their possession. But where did it come from? That a bag from where? All this eventually goes back to bag seed. Let's be real. So some plants.
Hey man, I just changed the name so that the other guy told you his variety. I'm like, oh crap.
Yeah, but I've grown strains that they just didn't perform. Sure. And like I said, sometimes going back to it, and like, okay, I have a strain. There's a few that I've grown that do foxtail super easy. Okay, well, we make the choice. We've got foxtailed out upper nugs. Happens every time we grow this. Do we want to keep it? Is it popular enough? Do we have a market where that's going to be real hurt by those nugs? Do we have pre-rolls to throw them in? Are we focused on jar appeal? There's a lot of factors in there for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a metric for rating as well with all the.
Yeah. And, if given the choice, depending on my situation, would I rather put a bunch of my top nugs into pre-rolls because they're foxtailed because I can't get my temp under control, let's say, or would I rather mold something out? Foxtails every time. I'd rather not throw away product. So that's definitely something to consider. And I'll go back to it. I've had some strains that I just loved, adored smoking and growing. And guess what? They do not perform commercially.
Yeah, it's not commercially viable.
Or my selection was just a, pack of seeds. I picked the one that was great for me to grow, which happened to be a dwarf. Well, go throw it in the big room and shit, I can only get, 40 grams a square foot off of this one in this certain setup, Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Oh man, we had so many great questions this week. Thank you guys for joining us and for sharing your information with our community. We really love to see you guys. I guess with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you guys for joining us today. Anyone else who did submit a question who did not include their email address, please do include that in the chat. Thank you guys for joining us this week. If you have questions about AROYA, how it can be used to improve your cultivation production process, or any other topic you'd like covered in future office hours sessions, please post it in the chat. You can shoot us an email at support.aroya@metergroup.com, or you can reach out to us on Instagram and send us a DM. We would love to hear from you. We record every session, and we'll be emailing everyone in attendance a link to the video from today's discussion. It'll also live on the AROYA YouTube channel. Like and subscribe while you're there. And if you find these conversations helpful, please feel free to share with your network and spread the word. We'll see you guys next time. Thank you, guys.